Hello again everyone and welcome back to my channel. In these uncertain times, I hope that all of you are safe, happy, and most importantly, healthy. In today's video, I want to talk to you guys about the concept of universal applications. And this is a concept that has some people extremely happy and other people extremely heated depending on your stance. Specifically, we're going to talk about AppImages, which is one of the technologies that are competing or kind of competing for the dominant spot here. And AppImages are actually my favorite, but I like all three. But I wanted to make a dedicated video about AppImages to show you guys what this concept is and why you might want to consider it and why I like it so much. But I'm going to be fair, I'm going to give you the cons as well. So this is going to be an overview of AppImages, and I think it's going to be fun. So let's go ahead and get started. To understand AppImages, we first have to understand what the problem is that they're trying to solve. So let's rewind a little bit. Let's rewind back in time before we even had the concept of universal apps. And even though we're taking a look back at the way things were, technically we're taking a look at the way things are because not much has actually changed. As you probably already know, all Linux distributions, or at least most of them actually, they all have the concept of repositories. You have a package manager, and then you have the ability to download packages from repositories that are centralized places to get libraries, applications, and the like. When it comes to software repositories and distributions, there's actually several challenges that we face as Linux users. And the biggest pain point for me is that repositories are often out of date. Now let's think of Libreoffice, for example. That's just a random example. You could use this example with any of the applications that you can typically download. If a Windows or Mac OS X, soon to be Mac OS 11 user wants to download and install the latest version of Libreoffice, well, they simply go to the Libreoffice website, download the installer, run it, and they're good to go. It's just that easy. For us Linux people, it's actually a little bit easier than that. We don't have to go to the Libreoffice website or the website for whatever the application happens to be. We just run apt install Libreoffice, whatever the package name is, and that's it. We don't even have to open a web browser. That's pretty cool. So actually, if it was a race, I think us Linux people, we would actually get that application installed much faster than a Windows or Mac OS X user would be able to do. So repositories do have their benefit, but often the problem is that these applications that are in the repositories are often extremely out of date. Now, if you are using a rolling distribution, let's just say Arch Linux, for example, then this isn't really so much of a problem because as soon as that application is available, it generally is available in the Arch Linux repositories very quickly, so you can actually get that application installed and get the latest version of that application installed with no problem. If you are using something like Debian Unstable and even Debian testing, if it's not in the current frozen state, you can also do the same thing. You can get the latest version of that application pretty much right away, and you could stay up to date on all of your packages. Now, the problem with that, though, is that there's a lot of distributions that are not rolling, and for those, you are locked to that version of that application for the entire life cycle of that distribution. So if you are running, let's just say, Ubuntu 18.04, then if you are just sticking to repository packages, then many of your applications and their versions will be locked to an older version until you eventually upgrade the entire distribution, because generally non-rolling distributions, they don't really like to include new versions of applications. They pretty much lock everything and then only update when there's a security update. Now, there's actually some exceptions to this. For example, in Ubuntu, they do ship the latest Firefox as soon as that's available. So they do make exceptions, but they don't make enough exceptions. So typically on non-rolling distributions, you are locked to very old versions of all of your applications. Now, when I was first starting out with Linux, this was a major annoyance for me. I would get some sort of announcement that a new version of one of my favorite applications has just been released, and then I go to try to install it, basically apt install or something like that, or just run my updates, and then get disappointed because that application is not being updated. Meanwhile, Windows users and Mac users, they could just go download that new version right now, no problem. And I just thought that was really annoying. And we also have ways that we can work around that too, because we can install a third-party repository that might have a newer version of that application. But we're taking some risks there because, what if that repository goes stale and the application is no longer updated and no longer receives security updates if it's not from the official vendor? That's a real problem. And then we have PPAs for Ubuntu, for example, which are like smaller repositories. But the problem with those is pretty much the same problem with any other repository. Even though PPAs are smaller repositories, they still suffer the same problems. They might go stale, or worse, go offline, and then none of your packages will install because anytime you run apt update to refresh your index, then it's just going to bomb because it hits a 404, and then you can't even install anything until you remove that repository. It's just a mess. Nowadays, if I put on my Linux administrator hat, then one of the annoyances I run into is shared libraries. For example, let's just say we want to run a newer version of Apache. So maybe somebody compiles Apache and they compile it against the system libraries that are on the system. And then maybe they want to run another application. That application is actually going to maybe depend on different libraries. There's all kinds of scenarios where installing applications on servers can fall down because maybe an application requires newer libraries. So while repositories is a major benefit to us Linux users, like I mentioned, we can get things faster, it's also a major downside as well. And also the Linux ecosystem can be a challenge for developers as well. So hypothetically, let's just pretend you are a developer and you have developed an awesome application that everybody wants to run. It's just so cool. So you do what pretty much all developers do. You release it for Mac and Windows, and then you decide to go ahead and target the Linux desktop as well. In that scope, you have to go ahead and basically create packages for Debian. So you want to create a deb package, but not just one. There's Debian. Ubuntu is different enough, so you're going to have to probably target that too. There may be multiple versions of Debian supported depending on if there's overlap or extended support. So you might want to consider 2 versions of Debian. With Ubuntu, you will have an LTS version, a non-LTS version at any one time that has support. So there's 2. And you have to basically develop a bunch of deb packages. And then you need to create an RPM package. So there's CentOS. And that should work with Red Hat, so we'll just consider that one and the same. But then you need to target basically OpenSSH as well. It's just a mess. To target the Linux desktop, you have to compile that app in all kinds of different versions. It's just a testing nightmare. And that's one of the reasons why developers don't target the Linux desktop, because they have to basically compile a bunch of different package types for one platform. And that's essentially where universal packages come in, because the idea is to have a package that you can run on any distribution. It doesn't need dependencies because they're all baked in, so you don't have to worry about your system libraries, and you don't have to worry about corrupting your package database since they're standalone. And as a user, you get to download the latest versions of your applications without installing additional repositories that might go stale. And as a developer, you could create one package and it just runs pretty much everywhere. And AppImages are one method that this can be achieved. The other technologies are Flatpaks and Snap packages as well. But what makes AppImages, in my opinion, special is that they're completely portable. So you could just simply download it, mark it executable if it's not already, and then you could just go ahead and basically run it. So I'm going to switch the camera over to my laptop, and I'm going to basically show you how I use AppImages, and then I'm going to also walk you through downloading one and running it as well, so that you can see basically if this is something you might want to consider running. But I'm also going to talk about the disadvantages as well. We'll get back to the video shortly, but I wanted to take a moment to mention my sponsor, Linode. Linode has been my infrastructure provider for well over a year now and has just recently announced their own managed Kubernetes service. Now you can combine Linode's ease of use and simple pricing with the infrastructure efficiency of Kubernetes. With the Linode Kubernetes engine, you can get your infrastructure and workloads up and running in minutes instead of days, and scale resources in real time to meet your infrastructure needs. With Linode's managed Kubernetes engine, pricing is simple. Only pay for what you use. And with Linode's 99.9% uptime SLA and bundled transfer, you can significantly cut costs when compared to AWS, GCP, and Azure. Designed with the open source ecosystem of Kubernetes, the Linode Kubernetes engine supports integration with tools like Helm, operators, and more. To help you get started with Kubernetes, Linode gives you access to in-depth documentation, video tutorials, and webinars. Go ahead and sign up at linode.com/learnlinuxtv to get a $60 60-day credit to test out LKE or any other of Linode's products. I really appreciate Linode's continued support of Learn Linux TV, so go ahead and check them out. You won't regret it. Now, let's get back to the video. So here on my laptop, I have the bin folder open right here. This is in my home directory. This is not basically the only way you can use AppImages, but it's the way that I use them. I put them all in this one folder. And having a bin directory is a very common thing for Linux users. You'll probably see this on other people's computers as well, if you don't already do this yourself. It's basically a place to put scripts and applications that you just want to run from your home directory. And you can see that I have quite a few here. Now, we're going to ignore the cht.sh, for example. That is not an app image, and neither is PyShrink. I keep all of my binaries and scripts in this folder. But basically, all of these that end in .app, these are app images, and this is not the standard extension or file name extension. Generally speaking, .appimage is the extension, and that's a best practice. I rename mine because I like to keep it simple. But you have to know, though, if you do rename the extension, some of the tools that you can use with AppImages won't recognize them. So it's probably a good idea not to change the extension. But, you know, I don't always make good decisions, but I basically wanted to keep it simple, and I thought .app would be a good file name. So right here, we have Libreoffice.app. If I right-click on that and go to Properties, we can see that this box right here, Allow Executing File as a Program, that is checked. That's the same as running chmod +x on the command line. It basically marks it executable. If that requirement is met, then basically that's all you need to do. This app image, the one I have highlighted, or any of the others, are completely standalone. If they're marked executable, you can just double click on it and it opens. And there's LibreOffice, and it actually opened pretty quick too. So I could just click on Writer Document, for example, and I'm using LibreOffice. Now, this isn't very surprising to many of you because LibreOffice comes basically default with every distribution, or just about every distribution, but this is not actually installed via deb. This is, like I mentioned, an app image, so it's completely standalone, and I can have a newer version of LibreOffice than the system would normally ship with. So for example, let's just go ahead and look at that here. So if I go to Help and then About, we can see that I have installed currently 6.4.3, and there could even be a newer version. I just haven't checked in a while. But the point is, this does not rely on the system packages at all. If a newer version is available, I just go get it. It's just that simple. And that's not actually specific to AppImages. That's the whole point of universal apps in general. Regardless of whether you are using snap packages, AppImages, Flatpaks, basically you're most likely going to get a newer version than you would get via the package repositories. And it also doesn't matter which libraries you have installed, the system libraries. There's not going to be like package dependency hell or anything like that. It's just going to work, and this actually makes applications in user space on Linux work pretty much the same as they would work on Mac or Windows, and I think at the end of the day, that's a great thing. Now there are a few downsides as well. Now the first disadvantage I want to mention might actually be considered an advantage depending on your opinion, and that is there is no central store for AppImages. Now some people like that because they don't want a walled garden. They don't want one store to rule them all, or one source to have complete control. The downside there is that with AppImages, there is no one site you go to find a curated list of app images. There is something that comes close, but there's no rules that when you make an app image, you have to put it on this site. So I think a lot of developers do, but some don't. So you might have to do some searching to go and find an app image if it's not on the main site. I'll show you that site in just a moment. Another downside, though, is the update technology that is here. Now, they do provide with AppImage a technology that developers can use to basically allow users to easily update the app. In my experience, most of the applications that I have used, they don't use that, meaning I have to go and find the updated version manually and replace it. And that could be a big deal if you are using something that could have a security vulnerability and it doesn't automatically get updated, or at least it doesn't give you an alert that an update is available. You might assume that you have the latest version and you don't, and then a hacker can use that against you. So with AppImages, there is a bit of responsibility on the part of the user to keep the system up to date, because nothing is consistent, because the developers of AppImages, the technology itself, they don't mandate that you have to do A, B, and C in order to make an app image. They make suggestions, strong suggestions, but it's up to the developer whether or not they will follow those suggestions, and oftentimes they don't. So depending on the application, it may or may not have an updater, and it even may or may not include a desktop file, which is basically a shortcut in the application menu. Some app images will also give you the ability to create a desktop shortcut on first launch, which is awesome. Some developers don't follow that. Now, it might seem like there's a lot of downsides here and you shouldn't use it, but the truth is AppImages are still my favorite, even despite that, because they're completely portable and it's up to me to go ahead and just manage them however I see fit. But there is one thing that I do that makes AppImages somewhat of a killer feature for me, which I'll show you right now. Now, I'll close this app right here. And now you can see the file manager here. Now what you don't actually see is the fact that I have this folder, this bin folder, managed by SyncThing. I did a video on SyncThing recently. Go ahead and check that one out, because if you want to use a utility or you're looking for a utility to synchronize your files across all of your computers, that's a great one to use. I highly recommend it. But what I'm doing here is I'm actually using SyncThing to sync this bin folder across all of my computers, which means if I was to download, let's just say, a new version of Kdenlive, then I simply replace Kdenlive with a newer version in this folder. And what SyncThing will do is it'll actually copy that same version to all of my other computers. So essentially, I just drop an app into this folder, and then literally all of my computers will get that version of the app. So I only need to update it one time, and then it's available pretty much everywhere. And for me, that's really awesome, because I don't have to check each of my computers if they have the most recent version. And if I discover a new app that I really want to run, that's really cool, I want it on all of my computers again, I just drop it in this folder and I'm good to go. Now let's go ahead and actually see what that looks like. So I'll just open up a browser here. And I already have SyncThing installed on this laptop. So I'm just navigating to localhost : and then the port number that SyncThing runs on here. And here we have SyncThing. Again, check out my video if you want to see how this works. But right here, you can see that I have a bin directory, and I have 1.16 gigs of files or so in that directory. And we can see right here that it updated the KeePassXC app image, which was the most recent one that I've downloaded. I downloaded the new version that was just made available. I basically saw a news article hit my feed that a new version was available, and I went ahead and downloaded it. I never saw an update message in the app itself, but it was pretty easy for me to go ahead and download it and then replace the current one with the new one. Back here on the file manager, I will open the Kdenlive app right here. And what version are we currently running? 20.04.1. Is there a new version available? Well, I don't know. Let's go ahead and find out. So I'll go ahead and just Google here for Kdenlive download. Now click on it here and we have the app image. It's the same version as the one that I already have downloaded, so I don't need to actually do anything. But, you know, if I was to go ahead and download it, we can see that it has an AppImage extension at the end. So if I go ahead and open the folder that the downloads go into, we can see that we have the downloaded version right here. I should be able to double click on it. Basically, the only requirement, like I mentioned, is that the permissions are executable, and I'm glad I checked because that was not the case. And I should be able to double click on it, and it's already actually coming up on my screen, which is pretty cool. And there's Kdenlive. I didn't have to run apt install. I didn't need dependencies. I just download it, mark it executable, and it's good to go. So what I'm going to do right now is show you guys the AppImage Hub, which is a place you can find a lot of app images that you can run on your system. And I'll have a link to this in the description below the video, but this is the AppImage Hub, which is a place you can go to get a curated list of a lot of app images. There will probably be some missing, because again, there's no rule that mandates that things must be placed here, but there is a huge list of apps that are available from this page. So if I scroll down, let's see what's available. So here's Arcade Manager, which is pretty cool. I've never heard of that before. I always discover new applications when I scroll through this list. It's pretty cool. But anyway, what else do we have? It's randomly Black Chocobo. It's a Final Fantasy VII save game editor. I am a huge Final Fantasy fan, so I'm really happy to see that. I don't have any save files right now. I don't even know where my PS1 memory cards are, but that's pretty cool that that's available. There's all kinds of stuff here. We also have Joplin available as well. And I actually have this downloaded already. I don't think I've ever run it before. We actually have an install button right here. I'll go ahead and click on that. It takes me to a list of releases. So I can go ahead and download this version right here if I'd like. And here it is. I'll go ahead and wait for that to finish. Then same thing, I'll open my downloads directory. And here it is. So what I'm going to do, and you probably shouldn't do this because again, we probably want to keep that app image extension, but I'm going to rename it to just basically match the naming scheme that I use on my system. And everything is always lowercase for me. So I will cut that. And then here in my bin directory, I will paste that in here. Wow, I haven't run this app since I've downloaded it. I basically downloaded it and forgot about it. So you can see here that I basically have a version from January of 2019. So this is definitely going to be a newer version. I'm glad I did this actually. So I'm going to replace it. And now we have the newer version. And if I go ahead and check sync thing, we should actually see this sync that Joplin app image right here to my sync thing server, which will then actually deliver that to all of my other computers. And I can see that it's syncing something. And normally sync thing will actually show a progress bar when it actually does sync something. But anyway, it went ahead and pushed that up to the server. So I know that it did that. And if I go back to my bin directory, let's go ahead and open it up. We do need to make sure that it is executable. And here we have Joplin. So we have Joplin installed. Well, kind of. It's in my bin directory. I downloaded it and now I'm running it. Maybe I'll check that out later, but for now, the downside here is that while they do their best to keep this up to date, developers don't always help out here. And sometimes the developers of AppImage, they actually can go in here, and even you can, because this is GitHub, you can go in here and update something if something is wrong. I mean, that's the whole point of GitHub. But anyway, here's Kdenlive. And this is actually what I run, and this is what this video is going to be edited in. The screenshot is currently broken for some reason, and we don't actually have an install button. So that's what I mean by the inconsistency, which is the downside. but I love the portability of AppImages. I think they're awesome. And even though you have to do a little bit of manual work to keep them going, I really like being in full control of the applications on my system and being able to synchronize the app that I download on one machine to all of my others. That's pretty cool too. Now, if I go back here to the very beginning, we have a special app image that I think you should consider downloading if you are going to use this technology. AppImage Update. This is a utility that you can use to basically search for an update. If the developer has update information built into the app image, then this will allow you to update that. And this app actually expects to find, by default, a .appimage file. So if you've changed the extension, as I have, well, then it's probably not going to see that. But this does depend on update information being provided by the developer. And when I ran this off camera, none of the app images that I use actually had that built in. So this utility is actually useless for me. But maybe for you, for the app images that you run, this might actually be something you might want to consider. It might be useful for you. And if you notice a developer is not including update information, then in spirit of the open source community, maybe we should actually be contacting them and just letting them know that they really should be doing that. Now, there's more to AppImages than this. I recommend that you go ahead and check them out. There's some documentation that you can read to grow your knowledge on this. There's utilities you can download that will go ahead and make this easier for you. But if nothing else, just simply downloading an app image, making it executable, and then being able to run it in place is really awesome. So I recommend that you check this out. Maybe you'll like it as much as I do. But either way, let me know what you think in the comments down below this video. I appreciate you checking out this video, and definitely subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll see you next time.